Well, hello. My name is Kristin Arnold, and welcome to Powerful Panels podcast. I am on a quest to make all panel discussions lively and informative. And today I'm so excited to have the incredibly talented David Cruickshank, who is a partner at Edge International. He's based out of San Diego. And I love the mission of this firm is that they are taking law firms to the next generation, their future. So it's about the evolution. And David, he's moderated like a ton of panels, specifically in the law, legal category. And what really struck my fancy is that he wrote a really interesting article for the American Bar Association called Conference Panel Sessions, Dead or Alive. Thank you, David, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Thanks for asking me.
So why Dead or Alive? That's an interesting title. Tell us more.
Well, I had experienced as a listener going to, my first career was as a law professor, as an academic. And I went to a number of academic conferences in my field. One of the things I noticed was that panel discussions rarely involved much discussion, neither discussion with the audience or discussion with the panelists. And so you had this, if we say a 1 hour panel, you'd have a short introduction of everyone and then sort of 18 minutes per person, although the first person goes over time, eats the next person's time, the third person gets cut short. Everybody has prepared remarks. They're kind of basically reading their academic papers. Now, the early ones I saw didn't even have audio, any visuals, like no videos, no PowerPoints, nothing. And so this is deadly. I said to myself, who can listen to this? Besides, I can read the paper. Give me the conference papers, and we'll all stop wasting our time here. And so I began to observe more carefully and pick up some ideas of panels that I thought were great. And then I'd go and talk to those organizers and ask them, well, tell me how the sausage was made here. And I gradually built up a repertoire of different types of panels that were far more interesting. And so I blamed the standard format, what I call the dead panel, on academia, where everybody is kind of staking their claim to an academic reputation. They have to put on their resume that they were invited to this conference. They gave this paper. And when they gave this paper, it has to be unilateral speaking at you, right? And so that model of panels, certainly in the legal profession, began to invade the entire conference space, not just academic space, but professionals in professional development and recruiting. And so the dead panel became the model, and I set out to try to turn them into alive panels.
I love that. You and I are on the same crusade, David. Rock on. So tell us about what your vision of a live panel is.
Well, a live panel is one that kind of has some ground rules. One is that no one ever speaks unilaterally for more than 3 minutes. So you are constantly going to be interrupted with questions or discussion between panelists. There are going to be, say, in an hour or 75 minutes, there are going to be planned breaks where the audience gets to ask questions or interact with the panelists, so that you're changing the scenery all the time, so that the listener is kind of constantly waking up. Oh, a different panelist is speaking. Now they're discussing with each other. Oh, we get a chance to ask questions. That never happens in a panel except at the very end, and they only have time for 2 questions. And so by engaging the audience more frequently, by having panelists interact with the audience, with each other, and keeping them short and tight. Imagine it's like a media interview. You know how a good media host lets the speaker know, we only have about 30 seconds left here, or I need people who are in that format understand they've got to be brief, they've got to be succinct. So I'm trying to convert panelists into that same way of thinking.
Excellent. I love the idea that it's a discussion and not a series of presentations.
Right.
And to chunk it up, I call it segments. I love how you say changing the scenery. Like our attention spans, at least today, in today's time and age, I think our attention spans are much shorter and we need that kind of variety. So tell us a little bit about this format that you wrote about in this paper, and you called it the demonstration response panel. So tell us a little bit about that technique.
Well, let me just kind of back up. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Let me just back up and say that the organizational format and demonstrations panels depend on this as well, is to chunk things down into topics rather than speaking by speaker, what each speaker wants to say. I convene the panelists early on before they get the idea that, oh, I'm going to get to make my 20-minute speech. And I say, let's break this into topics on which you all have something to say, and let's create topics. And once that's done, I assign out to the panelists, now create questions for me, the moderator, that you would like to be asked. So I collect questions around all of these topics. So I have in question format, here's what these panelists would like to be asked. Obviously, they've got answers to these things. So yeah, so having organized it into topics, we've got a framework into which I can assign a variety of speakers. I can change up the speakers. I can have a lead speaker, a second speaker, etc. And all of that can be organized in advance. So with that framework, we are organizing by topics, not by speaker. That's the beginning format. So in a demonstration panel, you have a similar format, but instead of the topics are organized around what we are going to see in the demonstration. And so the demonstration is something that takes place at the beginning, or it can be broken up into segments. So suppose that we were having a panel about good trial practice. How should lawyers present themselves at trial, right? And we had a judge, we had a defense lawyer, we had a plaintiff's lawyer, we had an expert witness who has attended many trials. Those were our panelists. So all those people have a somewhat different perspective, right? On
good cast of characters.
Yeah, what is good trial practice? So the way you would run it is you would say, all right, you present the case, here's the case, and now here's the plaintiff's lawyer's opening statement. And you would run that for maybe 5 minutes and stop. Now you would have planned that demonstration to have some strengths and some weaknesses, right? So for example, the plaintiff's lawyer might overpromise what he or she can prove at trial. And we know from the case study, that's a little bit of an exaggeration of what you can prove. The judge is going to say, don't do that on me. If you can't prove this at trial, don't tell me in the opening statement that you could, right? Besides, that might influence the jury. They might think that your words can somehow be proved. So what happens when we play the demonstration, even though I might have 20 minutes of video in the can as a demonstration, I'm only going to play 3 or 4 minutes at a time. Then I'm going to time out and turn to the panelists and ask them questions about what they're seeing in this opening statement. And they're going to give me a perspective on that. So I might get 2 panelists to comment on the first 4 minutes. And then, so let's go back to the demonstration. So what's happening? I'm changing the scenery again, right? Away from the panelists, back to the video. We run some more demonstration. I ask a different panelist to lead off on that segment. This all appears in the panel to be very spontaneous. In fact, it's not. It's meticulously planned. The questions are planned. The length of the demonstrations are planned. The panelists have all seen the demonstration in advance.
I mean, the demonstration itself sounds like that's a lot of work to do too.
Yeah, if you're doing video, but I have also done live demonstrations that are fairly simple to script. And I will get the panelists to actually script them. They're sometimes the experts. I've run demonstrations on what would seem to be a fairly boring topic, which is accounting practices in law firms. Some years ago in the US, they had to pass legislation to clean up the terrible accounting practices at places like WorldCom that went under. And so in explaining the legislation, one of the things that legislation dealt with was how do outside law firms talk to corporate counsel, and how do they talk to presidents of companies whose accounting practices are questionable. So I set up a demonstration of cell phone calls between people, and they would literally do it at the front of the room. Outside counsel calls inside counsel, they have a conversation, time out. And then we ask the audience, what would be the first thing you would do at the end of this conversation?
Oh, I like that you went into the audience versus ask the panelists.
Yeah, and then turn to the panelists, right? So, and the audience were full of corporate in-house lawyers, right? Who said to them afterwards, they said to me, I have conversations like this all the time with their outside lawyers. So it has to be something that resonates with the audience. They have to say, man, I recognize that. That is exactly what happens to me. So you have to do a bit of digging to find out what your audience experiences, and you encapsulate that in the demonstration. So it can be video, it can be, I ran these little cell phone calls live. I just had the lawyer get out their cell phones and talk to each other at the front of the room. Very short, but it captured the essence of the problem. And I've seen live demonstrations where a witness was interviewed. I've run them for negotiations, for example, different styles of negotiation to illustrate an aggressive style versus a cooperative style. And then timeout, panel discusses. Audience gets.
I love the fact that these demonstrations have good points and intentionally not great points so that there is something to react to.
Right, right. And that differs from if I'm trying to train junior lawyers on how to acquire a skill, my demonstrations are going to be pretty good because I want them to know the right way to do things. But when I'm trying to create some comment and controversy and exchange of views, I want it to be purposely flawed in some ways. Because if it's terrific and everybody agrees it's terrific, we don't have much to talk about. So
okay. No, that was a good demonstration. So I think that that's an interesting point. This is not a training workshop. This is a panel discussion. So there has to be something to discuss. Now, I think one of the things that I'm hearing in this is having a really good question script. That's what you called it in this article. Tell us a little bit about your question script.
The script, I start with a chart, and this is a chart that will eventually get completed. It takes me 3 conference calls. If I'm the moderator, I do this in 3 conference calls. The first call is, let's generate these topics. All right, we agree these are the 6 topics. I then say to the panelists, I'm going to assign each of you a couple of these topics. I have 3 panelists, you each get 2 topics. Send me questions. They send me the questions. I put them into my script, into my chart. On the left-hand side of the chart, there is timing. So eventually we're going to assign so much time for each question. And there are a couple of columns for the speakers, the lead speaker, the second speaker, anyone else, etc. And that's where I'm going to put initials of the lead speaker. So eventually I'm going to get a script that says, we're going to have 5 minutes to discuss this. Here's the topic. Here are the 2 questions. Here are the speakers. And so I'll eventually, at the end of 3 conference calls, I'll have that all filled out. And I'll even have a column with slide numbers, because we may have slides to accompany what the panelists are saying. So my end goal is that completed script with timing, questions, speaker, slides, all in one place. And then what happens, and lawyers are terrific at this, they can fake it, right? They can pretend this is all just very spontaneous. That, oh, now Joan is going to comment on Anne's first remarks. And so I might say as a moderator, does anyone have a comment on that? And she speaks up and she's got a well-prepared comment. Well, that was all planned in advance, but they're very good at making this come across as quite a spontaneous discussion.
Now, do you give them permission to jump in unscripted?
Yes, yeah, that indeed happens. And, I ask them to, especially in a Zoom environment, I ask them to raise a hand to make sure that I can spot them in the Zoom call and bring them in. Absent that interruption, I kind of know who's going to speak next. In a live panel, I always set up the panel so that, here's a little tip for people who are doing live panels. I want to make sure that as a moderator, I'm at a slight angle to the row of panelists so I can look down the row and make eye contact with them. If I'm directly parallel to them like this, that's really hard to do. So I want to have either a podium or a chair that's angled toward the panel as well as toward the audience. Again, think of how does a media person set this up. The audience is out there and they're looking at an angle to their speaker, right? So you have to think the same way in terms of the visuals for a panel. They have to be able to see you. You have to be able to get eye contact.
Excellent advice. Okay, so you mentioned on your script that you have PowerPoints. Now, when do you allow PowerPoints and when do you go, no?
I really dislike PowerPoints that are really just going to end up being kind of reading. For example, if you were to tell me, oh, you want to put up a section of the criminal law statute, in 12-point type, I'm going to say no. You're just going to explain in your own words what that law says. What I would want for PowerPoints are things that show relationships between things, like sort of an organization chart or a sequence of events with single words in it. Every now and then, a photograph in a PowerPoint can be powerful. I once saw an outstanding environmental law panel that was run as a combination of case study and demonstration. And it was of a farm where groundwater had got contaminated and damaged and killed sheep on the farmer's farm. And he was now saying, it's the fault of the polluter, and you owe me for my sheep, right? So, and they had photographs. They had photographs of this farm, the sheep, where the polluted water was found, etc. So that was very telling. It really comes into your head. Oh, this is a real thing. This is not some made up story, right?
Right.
So that photographs can be powerful as well.
So do you manage the PowerPoint slides or how do you manage that?
Well, in an ideal environment, a moderator's pretty busy already. And so I would like to have an assistant or a support person who is managing the slides. And they also have my question script, right? With the column of what slides accompany what speaker. So they generally know what's coming up and it's all sequenced. And so the moderator simply says, next slide.
So you're putting the slide deck together.
Well, as the moderator, I'm assembling the slides that my speakers have contributed.
Right. But you're bringing in all of their inputs and you've got the one slide. Right. Versus
and they get a single template as well. Quite often with the conference logo on it. Mm-hmm. Right. So instead of disparate templates from 3 different people from 3 different organizations, I've got the conference logo on the top of the slides, a standard template. So you don't have this disjointedness of what is this slide? I have no idea where this is coming from. So there's continuity in the slides, but the key is it's one more thing I don't have to think about. Am I on slide 10 or slide 12? I simply say next slide and they advance it. I don't always have that luxury. I ran a panel online just 2 weeks ago for an intellectual property conference. And I had to run the slides as well as manage the Zoom call and deal with people in Australia, Colombia, and Washington, D.C. So they were all in like bizarrely different time zones. So that was a juggling act.
Hey, at least they all spoke English and you didn't have to use the translation.
Well, that's true. Although I did, the Colombian and I use Spanish a little bit. So I speak some Spanish. So and my wife is Colombian. So that's,
there you go.
We were just having fun.
So you have done so many panels and you've got such a wealth. I'm going to put this article, the URL, in the session notes. Yes. Is there anything else that you believe panel moderators should do when they're moderating panels?
I think that a lot of panel moderators are afraid to go to the audience, to go out to the audience. And their concern is a legitimate one. And that is, if I let this happen, it'll get out of control. That is, I will get too many questions, we'll lose time. My expert panelists who've put all their effort into this won't get their chance. So as a moderator, you have to understand you are perceived as a leader. And your panelists are going to go along with you because you've put this effort into planning it. So are audience members. So I will say, and I give them kind of subtle, not so subtle ground rules. I have time for a few questions now from our audience. And I'll see 10 hands go up. I'll pick one, I'll pick a second. Then I'll say, maybe after 3 questions, we have time for one more. And that's it. I can't satisfy all 10. I won't. I'm looking at my watch. And so don't be afraid to say to your audience, we have about 4 minutes for questions. There'll be more time at the end. Let me just field some questions. The other thing I've done with audiences is ask them to solve a problem. So we'll have in the materials a problem that we've generated that arises from the panel. And I'll say, all right, in your materials, there's a little problem here. I want you to get in pairs. That's very easily done, no matter how the seating is done. Turn to somebody next to you, take a look at this problem, solve the problem, and then we're going to come back to the panel and ask their solution. So this aims at a really important thing about adult learning. Adults love to have an opportunity to autonomously problem solve or apply knowledge. That's what they do all the time in their jobs, right? So if I give them a chance to solve a problem that the panel has knowledge about, they get to try it. Then they hear what the panel says about solving that problem. I'm talking about half a page, third of a page.
Absolutely. It's kind of like the what would you do?
Here's exactly.
What would you do? You discuss, and even in the virtual world, you can put them in breakout rooms pretty easy.
Yeah, put them in pairs easily. Yeah.
They can chat and then they come back and you could debrief. You could go to the panelists. You could do a whole bunch of different things. So
the one thing not to do, though, is don't try to sample an answer from everybody. I've seen panelists like die out because they decided, well, we have to sample every small group. You don't have to. Again, your audience will accept that you're only going to sample maybe 3. They'll accept you as the timekeeper and the person who's kind of running the show.
Those wise words. David Cruickshank from Edge International, I thank you so much, sir. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, where would they get a hold of you?
I guess on our website, www.edge-international.com, edge-international.com. My professional profile is there under our people, it's called. And I'm at david@edge-international.com.
Excellent. Well, I really do appreciate you being on the crusade to make all panel discussions lively and not dead. Thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can listen to us on Apple and Stitcher and Spotify and just about anywhere you can get podcasts. So thanks for being on this journey with all of us. And thank you, David. Have a very lovely rest of your day.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks.